Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Gardenhire, and I'm the program coordinator at Artadia. Artadia is an organization that supports artists through unrestricted financial awards and other connections between artists and curators. So we put together a program called Art and Dialogue, where we invite curators and critics to visit with our awardees. They do studio visits over the course of 3 days and put on a public program with partnering institutions. So we're really happy to partner with Atlanta Contemporary today to bring Antwaun Sargent from New York. He's a writer and critic living in New York. Sorry, I'm going to read from my phone. Where are we? Antwaun Sargent is a writer and critic living and working in New York City. Recently, he wrote We Are More Than This, an essay for the Tate Modern on the occasion of the museum's Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power, and is in conversation with filmmaker and artist Arthur Jafa in the Dallas Museum of Art's Truth 24 frames per second exhibition catalog. His writing appeared in The New Yorker and The New York Times. This summer, he's co-curating the 2008 Summer Open. So usually curators put on hour-long lectures, and considering Antwaun's practice, he really wanted to give the stage back to the artist. So we've invited our 2017 Artadia awardee, Michi Meko, and also Atlanta Contemporary Artist in Residence, Masud Olufani, who also happened to be a finalist in our 2017 Atlanta Awards. So I'm really glad to invite them to the stage. And also encourage all of you who are artists to look out for the Atlanta Artadia Award application, which is open in September. So without further ado, I will hand the floor to Antwaun.
I'm going to sit. My name is Antwaun Sargent. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Artadia for inviting me, and Atlanta Contemporary. Can you guys hear me? Okay. For having me. Oh, no. Okay. Okay. Sorry. How was that? Good. Okay. For having me, and I wanted to, as Jonathan kind of briefly talked about, when I'm thinking about why I became a writer and why I particularly write in the way that I do about the artists that I do, it really leads back to this idea of dialogue. Being in conversation with an artist, being in conversation with the artist in the studios, in galleries, in spaces, outside of museums and outside of, their studios. And so it's about kind of thinking about the artist practice and the artist's voice, and how to kind of ground that in the culture in which we're living. And so a quick story, in 2012, before I became a writer, I was at the Brooklyn Museum, and I saw, and a friend invited me to see a show by an artist who I didn't know at the time, Nicolene Thomas, and she had a major survey there called Origins of the Universe, and I'm looking at the work, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen anything like this, and this is really wonderful in the way that she's talking about blackness and centering femininity and her mother and kind of all, and this idea of the muse, and so I go online to kind of find more information about her practice, this artist, and the only thing that I was coming up was kind of more academic, museum kind of text, and I wasn't seeing articles or her voice in places where I like to read them. And so that began a process for me of making sure that artists like Nicolene, who I've been in conversation with in different magazines over the last few years, voices are heard outside of institutions and outside of their studios, and that are really kind of engaged in a way that is kind of with popular culture. And so that has been the way that I've been thinking about this idea of dialogue and this idea of having, being in conversation with artists. And then that kind of brings us in a lot of ways to today, in the sense of when Jonathan and Artadia asked me to do this, I was thinking about, okay, so if I don't want to have a conversation, I don't want to just talk about what I do, right? Because you can read that if you want, but I really want to kind of show what it means to be in dialogue with artists and in a space. And how you do that, in my mind, is you kind of turn it over to those artists and allow them to, my kind of idea was like they can do whatever they want in a space for 10 to 15 minutes, which I think it would be kind of I think what we started on was a presentation of their work. And I also kind of, in thinking about this idea of dialogue, I was thinking about conversations that I've had over the years with artists that have changed or challenged my idea of art or my idea of writing or my idea of the ways in which we're living in the world. And so one of those artists is the photographer Ayanna V. Jackson. She's based between New York and South Africa, and she makes she uses self-portraiture to talk about black femininity historically and in the present day, as it kind of relates to racism and colonialism and kind of different other kind of aspects of identity and freedom in history. And she told me, and I was recently in conversation with her about a show that she was a part of in Morocco, and she said, and we're talking about photography and the history of photography and how the history of photography is a fraught history, and it's at best a contested contested medium. And she goes, you have to fight photography with photography, which is, in a way you're like, duh, but but the way that it was so poetic, the way that she said it, because what she was saying, or at least how I, kind of took that, was that you have to, if you want to change the institution, or if you want to change the conversation in art or in society or in culture, what you have to do is you have to kind of use the tools of those institutions. And so in her case, photographer who was not, happy with the representations of black women in, the medium, in the history of that medium. And so what she chose to do was use that same medium to create a new lane or create a new space for her voice and for her, and for her identity. And it's like that small thing in a conversation, we maybe talked for 40 minutes, that said, okay, well, the politics being what they are today, that we have to kind of go into the institutions that we care about, or the spaces that we care about, and take up space in those spaces for what we believe in. And that was really kind of an eye-opening conversation that I had with Ayanna, and then I had this conversation with Arthur Jafa around his film Love is the Message. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but if you haven't, please see it. It's a really kind of amazing film. And we were talking, and I was, and the conversations in Truth, the Dallas Museum of Art catalog, we were talking about kind of his career. And so Arthur, AJ's career started, 1991 with Daughters of the Dusk, right? And then he's kind of having this resurgence. He director of photography on Solange's two videos. He released Love is the Message. He's kind of in all museums across the country and really across the world at this point with this film. And so we're talking, and I asked him, what's the message of this film, and I'm gonna read in a second, but he starts to kind of go through his career and his career trajectory and what he's trying to do. And so he says, this film seems like a big arrival, but it's what I've been working on since I shot Daughters of the Dust. Daughters was the first film that I've ever shot. At this point in my life, I'm not just at war with the fucked up images of black folks that diminish us and society at large, but with the forms that deliver these images as well. When Daughters was originally in theaters, I gave a talk at the New School. And this older white woman stood up and said, when I see Daughters and I see the grandmother, I don't see race. I don't see color. I see my own grandmother. She was actually trying to be progressive. But I immediately said, yeah, that's all cool and well, but how come you can't see color and see your grandmother? How come those two things are mutually exclusive? How come you have to erase something we cannot erase, our color? How come you have to suspend that for you to be able to have a point of identification? The question is, how come we can't be as black as we all, sorry. The question is, how come we can't be as black as we are and still be universal? How come we have to refuse who we are in order for someone to be able to identify with us? How come the audience can't see themselves in a thing, whether it looks like them or not? It's what black people do, because most of what we see when we watch movies are white people. It's what women have developed the ability to do, because most of what they see are men. It's what gay people do. It's what gay people have the ability to do, because most of what they see is heteronormative stuff. That's a muscle that everyone needs to develop, the ability to see oneself in someone else's circumstances without having to paint that person white, make that person straight, or a man. How come you can't see yourself in the other? That's what it really comes down to, empathy. I'm trying to make my shit as black as possible and still have you deal with my humanity. And what was kind of amazing about what AJ said in that conversation is really, for me, kind of represents the heart of why I write and why I'm going to co-curate the show at the photography show at Aperture. It's about centering, it's about empathy and centering everyone's voices in the conversations that we're having in our culture. And today is, kind of an extension of that for me. And it's, why in a second I'm going to turn it over to, these two amazing artists to talk us through the conversations they're having in their heads, and they're having with other people, and they're having in their studio, and they're having with, art and art history. And so the last thing I really kind of want to say is that, when I, started, I guess, writing, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was, the only thing I want to do, and I think it holds true now, is to center the artist's voice and center what they have to say about society, and center what they are trying to evidence, about themselves in the world. And I hope we can continue that today. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
I'm Michi Meko. I live here in Atlanta. I'm from Florence, Alabama, but I've been here 20 years, trying to do what it is that I'm doing right now in this seat. And I had no plan Bs, and so here we are. A lot of my work is about navigation and buoyancy. I'm very interested in how Black bodies navigate public space. And me being a bigger guy with a lot of shoulders, I'm always hyper aware of my size and my presence and what that means. But then I'm also concerned about what that means being sort of this giant black male. And so I'm trying to make these maps that help me get through public space or everyday life. And within those maps are giant contradictions. They're maps that are taken from various map forms and then combined into an abstraction, which becomes a contradiction. So I don't know if these things are helping or not, but for me personally right now, they are sort of a guide through this, through space. And the image that we see right now, the newer work, is based off of oil spots because I was very interested in how do we have a conversation about black males who've lost their lives, but and I don't want to look for the simple answer of, oh, the low-hanging fruit, like here's a cop, here's a image. Like, how can I talk about that in a more poetic way? And so I begin to think about where these people lay and where those spirits are lost. And in the streets, at the time, I was very fascinated by oil spots. So I begin to go back and look at these events and not focus so much on the violence, but the place where they lay. And so each of these works are given a date, and that is that person's death date. And so this is Jordan Davis, and the title of this work is November 23rd, 2014. And this one happened in Ferguson. And this work, I don't know if we can see it well, but it mimics the oil spots in the space where this person lay. So I was very interested in sort of the space, the place. And as I was going through this work, a lot of this work was inspired by Alice Coltrane. And as I was about to give the lecture for this body of work, an article popped up on my phone. It was NPR, and there's an article there by Sydney Monday. And everything that I had been working towards for the last 6 months or so, she sort of summed up in an article. And I kind of want to read a little bit. And it was, it had been relentless since Michael Brown in 2014. A visceral kind of hopelessness had drifted in like fog as the names and the cities piled one on top of the other. So when an acquaintance recommended meditation, I was annoyed. I tried before and failed. The opaque sheets of news static rolled around in my head as I tried to sit silently with soothing music, accented with sounds of waterfalls or occasional bird chirps. But this particularly exhausting summer, I discovered Alice Coltrane and decided to try meditation again. And so a lot of this work had come out of me trying to find a way to be poetic about what it is that I want to say about these people. And this is probably one of the works that was a large-scale work that was a breakthrough, which was actually on this wall out front. And this work was, it's the Dove Enola, which is my grandmother. And the Dove Enola, for me, sounded like a ship. And so I wanted to do a piece where I could communicate with my grandmother. And if you know anything about Congo cosmograms, then you can read that. But there's a lot of coded line work and messages in this work. 2 mason jars filled with okra seeds and rope gold chains. Vintage milk glass. Some beautiful garden fabric to communicate this sort of voyage with that helps me communicate with my grandmother. And this work is titled She. And in the exhibition with the dated works of the oil spots, she is a feminine form that acts like a center. The show is called Kazuko, which is peaceful child. So that work, this object, this piece, was surrounded by those names and or by those dates. And she acted as a center. And this was a work that you could walk up to. I created a path that you could walk up to, but never fully see what's inside of the gourd and the water fountain. It was a sound piece that operated as like the water reacts in such a way and the sound reacts in such a way. So when you walk up to that piece, I'll play a piece of what it is that you hear. And it's from Alice Coltrane. And we have to pay the bill first. So that continues on, and it's on a loop and a repeat with an actual water fountain that is a centerpiece above a diamond dust encrusted skillet, which acts as another center point for these dates, for these spirits to be into one center place, which is she. So there you see like the vastness of the piece, but you're invited to walk into this piece and hopefully have a transformation. But then also think about the dates and what that means, and those spirits or souls or that energy that is no longer with us and why it left us. So I'm very interested in right now in creating these transformative places, because I believe that once you walk down that path and try to see into this sort of universe that is she, and you become engulfed in all of this material and all of this blackness, and when you reverse out, is my belief system that there has been a spiritual change within you. And that's the work that I've presented for today.
I just love diasporic expression. Just really beautiful. Thanks, Michi.
Oh, thank you.
My work, hi, my name's Masud. Atlanta-based artist, born in Los Angeles, California, raised in New York. Spent some time in New Orleans, Miami, Florida, Atlanta, and went to Morehouse College and then graduate school at Savannah College of Art and Design. My work deals a lot with narrative. I grew up actually living in Far Rockaway, Queens for much of my high school experience, well, for the beginning of my high school experience. But I was going to school in Newark, New Jersey, because I couldn't get into LaGuardia Arts High School because I lived outside of the district. So the one school that would accept me, arts-based high school, was in Newark, New Jersey. So I'd get up at like 4:30 in the morning every day and hop the train at like 5:30. So I had like literally 2.5 hours of time to just chill. And back then there were no iPads. I know I'm dating myself a little bit here. No iPads, no iPods, none of that stuff. You had a Walkman, you either slept, watched people, or you read. So I read. And as a result of that, I really got invested in narrative as something that kind of worked its way into me, and the power of stories to kind of transform you. It's my introduction to the Harlem Renaissance writers, and Toni Morrison, and Baldwin, and all that kind of stuff. So my work investigates narrative as a kind of thematic element, and in particular, this notion of African folklore and African-American traditions, vernacular traditions, how malleable our language structure is. One of the things that's really powerful about the African-American linguistic expression is it's the way it operates multivalently, right? So you say one thing in one context, it means one thing, and then you say it in another context, it means something completely different. And all that goes back to slavery and beyond. But during the time of slavery, of course, you had to have an encoded language within the language in order to keep yourself safe, because if you said what you really felt, there were repercussions and consequences. So, nevertheless, so some of the pieces that you see, I wonder if we can click on the one, can we click in the top left corner? And just to get it, make it a big, like, yeah. So this is part of a show that was UGA called Tripwire. And then we can just use the previous, and yeah, go to the next one, please. Thank you. This is a piece called The Trap a Trickster. It's a rabbit that's been sculpted in plasticine and then fired, excuse me, not plasticine, clay, and then fired. A dome structure that is based on the dome structure from the Portuguese in Salvador de Bahia, in Bahia, Brazil. There is a projector embedded within the dome structure that projects a cross-section of the Brooks slave ship. And I was very much interested in this piece and talking about this whole notion of subversive kind of resistance, in a way. The dome structure is a metaphor and allegory for the power of the state, Portugal to be specific. And then the rabbit refers to Legba, the West African Yoruba god, who exists at the crossroad where choices and decisions are made. The Brer Rabbit stories, which were done by, which were basically a collection of stories which Chandler Harris, who had a house here in Atlanta, in Southwest Atlanta, stories that he collected from enslaved persons that he knew growing up, and then turned those stories into children's stories. So the Brer Rabbit comes from Legba, and then Bugs Bunny comes out of Brer Rabbit. So you have this continuous streamline of consciousness going all the way back to Africa. And a lot of times we look at these like, cartoon characters or things in popular culture that exist in perpetuity, but we don't realize the history, where they come from, how they've been generated. So for me, in the context of this piece, the rabbit is a stand-in for all of those Africans that were brought into Salvador de Bahia, which has the largest concentration of Africans outside of the continent of Africa of anywhere in the world. And the question here for me, the kind of tension between the state doing the trapping, or is the rabbit trapping the state? So that, not answering that question, but presenting this kind of conceptual configuration and then allowing for people to kind of figure that out for themselves. We can go forward. Thank you. Go again. It's all copper leaf on that dome, by the way. Keep it going. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm also very interested in material relationships. This notion of materials being invested with this kind of history, this kind of social history that has been grafted onto them through repeated use. And just providing a platform to allow those materials to kind of speak for themselves, not imposing a meaning, but allowing that history to speak for itself. So this piece is a piece called Constellation, very much about the kind of contradiction of existing at a space that has these kind of like oscillating realities. On the one hand, these are structures that are kind of shaped like beehives, which are points of domesticity and community, but at the same time, they're also projectiles. So the black body existing in that very precarious location between those two oscillating points. And what that felt like, I know what that felt like for me as a young African-American male growing up in America as I moved through public space or through the world and feeling this point of tension and just trying to navigate that experience. Keep going. Another piece here called Snip Hive. This is 310 handmade bees, and they've been sculpted and I did molds and then cast them in resin. Renderings of my ancestral family members on the outside of the form, and there's a sound device embedded within it. So when you approach the object, you'll hear these buzzing sounds like a beehive, and then that slowly dissolves, and then the sound of a one-room Baptist church in Alabama comes up singing a Negro spiritual. And the two recordings kind of blend, so it's almost like a chorus, and it's very difficult to tell where the bees begin and end and where the chorus begins and ends. So let's do like two more. Go ahead. Keep going. It's just the branch that was part of the installation. Keep going, please. This is a 360-degree shot of the show that I had at the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Georgia, part of the Working Artist Project grant, 2015-16, I think. We can go forward on this a little bit. These are three works from that show. The one on the left is called Tight Packers, A Depleted Harvest. The one in the middle on the ground is called Root Anchor After Gober. And then the one on the right is called The Sentiment. I'll just do a quick talk about the one on the left. You can go forward a little bit. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah. So tight packers is a term that comes from the 19th century. It is a method for packing slave ships that was very prevalent during the time of antebellum slavery. There were two methods. There was one called loose packing and one called tight packing. Loose packing was considered to be more humane because they would put less people in the hold of the ship. Because they gave people more room to maneuver, it was thought that it would decrease the chance of the spread of disease. And of course, tight packers didn't care. They put as many people in the hold as they possibly could, and the ship became a breeding ground of pestilence and disease. So I wanted to take the notion of tight packing and graft it onto a contemporary issue, which for me is the mass incarceration of black and brown bodies in the penal system. The sardine can for me seemed like a really powerful conceptual vehicle because it talks about cramped space or confined space, I think in a very visceral way. So I did a series of renderings of black and brown men and embedded them in the sardine cans and pulled the lips of the cans down and then inscribed them with prison ID numbers. And you can go forward one image. Thank you. It was taking that, it was kind of like trying to collapse time and link this contemporary issue to something that also went on in the past and kind of in a way show that how things we think are new are not necessarily new. There's a long history. At the center of the installation is a class graduation photograph with several silhouettes cut out. The idea being that some of these individuals were people that would have been in that graduation photo. There's about 90 sardine cans in this piece. I had a lot of friends eating sardines. Everybody had good skin for like that several months leading up to the exhibition. Lots of amino acids, you know. And I ate a lot of sardines myself too. So, but anyway, yeah. So that's kind of, is that about my 15 minutes? Are we about there? Okay, cool. So that's kind of what I do. Oh, one last thing. I'm sorry. I'm working on a project right now for a 5 Point Smarter Station, or that hopefully will be installed at 5 Point Smarter Station, called Blocked at 5 Points, which deals with the history of 5 Point Smarter Station before it was a MARTA station during the time of the Civil War. A lot of people don't realize, but 5 Point Smarter Station was a thriving slave market, and there's no public indicator or marker in that space at all. So when I found out that that information, I was initially very pissed, I still think I am a little pissed. And then also very sad for that kind of lost history and lost memory for the city. And I think the public officials in our city have done a very good job historically of telling certain narratives, but keeping other narratives from us. So I decided that I wanted to do a permanent installation to memorialize those people that passed from auction block to plantation house. So the piece has been designed, we're fully funded. We're just waiting for the city to figure out what it wants to do. But nevertheless, there's also a performative piece that has risen up in conjunction with that piece, which is not dependent on approval for the city, which will be done nevertheless. So anyway, that's a little bit about what I do. So thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No?
You want
I think I turned it off.
You want to use
I
this
can
one?
yell.
My voice gets a little big, so
Okay.
I can do this.
So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to ask a few questions if you have them, or I'll just keep asking questions. My first question is, when you're thinking about your practices as artists, who are you in dialogue with? Who are you communicating with the kind of various issues you're raising within the work?
Do you mean like living or dead or?
Just in general, I mean, open-ended question.
Well, for me right now, I'm really into Alice Coltrane and that thought of spirituality and what that means for me as I move forward in my practice. And I'm also fascinated by Jimi Hendrix and trying to find what it is about what he did and who he was that made him such a god in the terms of like the English, because I don't think that white people had ever seen such a man before. And so I'm very interested in about what it is about Jimmy right now that's going through that. I talked to one of my friends, William Downs, who's an artist working here. We share a lot of content, go back and forth to discuss our practices and what it is that we want to achieve. And we talk about materialities and histories. Philandus Thames, another artist who came out of Yale, that's from Mississippi. So we have a very special way of talking about the finer parts of art in sort of our southern vernacular. So it's very interesting to see these. I think that our conversations would be amazing to hear these educated men speak of art in terms of southernisms, and which becomes, you know, sort of these black southernisms. And but I seek like influence from my practice, like, I mean, just this right now, because once I got the call, I instantly went to Google you to see who you were and what it is that you are about, and how can what I do influence what you do. So like that sort of idea of stalking black creatives is something I find great joy in. Like, it's like a treasure hunt, like especially with social media, because you can know an artist online, but then it's another thing to actually see that artist and then have that dialogue, and then you understand why you enjoy that artist's work. So I think that I'm one of the things that I find great joy in for my practice is mining black artists, is discovering the voice and the languages that are out there, and seeing like how black artists are creating their own lanes, sort of telling this giant story of these people, and or of this situation, or of this. I don't know. It's so exciting. It's like super exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm all over the place when it comes to looking for influences for my practice. Like, I'm completely all over the place.
I have a tendency to start with, I try to begin with intention when you're talking about who am I speaking to. There's definitely a sense of the presence of the ancestors that I feel very forcibly in when I'm in the studio and I'm working through issues with the work, when I'm thinking about what I want to create. So there is this, for me, this clear spiritual dialogue going on between the spirit world and and the physicality of the ephemeral universe. And intention for me is very important. It's a wonderful quote from the Baha'i writings. I'm a Baha'i, and it says, "Art is as a ladder for the soul." And I begin with that kind of intention, thinking about how I can create something that can lift us collectively as a human family. And not just begin and end with addressing a social challenge, but does it in some way inspire one to want to transcend in a way, or to find ways to navigate beyond that challenge. So I definitely feel that deep kind of spiritual dialogue with the ancestral realm, with the soul. And then also there's all these amazing artists and writers that I've been exposed to. I feel like I'm in dialogue. I've learned a lot about language, how to think about visual culture and using objects and materials to create this kind of language. So, I mean, I'm thinking about John Coltrane. I'm thinking about, Kind of Blue from Miles. I'm thinking about Baldwin. I'm thinking about Morrison. I'm thinking about Martin Puryear. I'm thinking about Leonardo Drew. All these really amazing creatives. I'm thinking about Michi. I'm thinking about Radcliffe Bailey. I'm thinking, so many phenomenal artists. We're really, Cosmo White, we're really blessed in this city to have a cadre, a cohort of really amazing artists that I think can compete with any group of artists anywhere in the country. So these people inspire me. And I'm definitely feeling a sense that when I'm creating, there's this ongoing dialogue with my cohort of creators, with the ancestors, and with these other artists, some who have gone on, who continue to inspire and encourage me to continue on in the journey.
How are those dialogues showing up in the work, if you can both provide an example?
Well, for me, the last exhibition and its lecture, the title Kazuko comes from a Pharoah Sanders song, which Pharoah Sanders and Alice Coltrane were collaborators, and I worked in a collaboration for 10 years, and so now it's me hearing my own voice, and so I'm very interested in what Alice's voice sounds like without the other instrumentation, you know what I mean? So I've gone as far as to buy a very rare record that she only gave out to her friends, and I happened to get my hands on one at a very good price. And so for me, taking ownership of that, adds a layer into that. And then, like right now, I'm on eBay. You guys may see me on my phone. I'm trying to get a very rare Jimi Hendrix record. And so it's sort of me taking possessions of these things that represent these people and then bringing them into what is that I do or what is that I believe, I think. I forgot where I was going. It's so much I want to say. It's so much I want to say. I get so excited to talk about art. It's like because I can make the parallels and how things relate to practice through almost any form. And like right now, Nipsey Hussle is something that's very special, I think, to my practice too. Also bringing that sort of mentality of the LA street hustler, but that is also a black entrepreneur. And so I'm thinking a lot about that as in my practice too. Like, my brain does like this.
Yeah, I think there's a real consciousness in my work, this really kind of conscious approach to craft, to the inner structure of an object, to it having some kind of internal integrity, and then that in itself reinforcing what's on the outside as well. And that inner, kind of construction is something that the audience may never see. But there's something about that kind of integrity for me that's very important. And I think about, you asked about, specific influence in a particular, in a piece of work. I'm thinking about Martin right now, and about his methodical approach to craft and how beautiful his objects are. You're never sure exactly how they're made, and once you find out how they're made, you're like, oh my God, I didn't even think that that's how it was constructed or put together. Like the hive piece that I was talking about, and really focusing on how that thing's put together, how I'm going to house a listening device on the inside. And so I'm feeling his voice over my shoulder as I'm making this stuff. I'm feeling, Toby Martin, who was my professor at Spelman College when I was at Morehouse, who's since passed on, who was a tremendous artist, just amazing. And he always used to tell me when I would come in, I'd be in the studio, he's like, Masud, craftsmanship, craftsmanship, craftsmanship. So it's like, that kind of haunting mantra that's there, and it keeps me engaged in every aspect of the creative process, even things that to the layman's eye would probably go unnoticed, but to me they're noticed. And I find that there's a real beauty and a discipline that goes into paying as much attention to that which is the most inconspicuous as you do to the grand gesture. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's okay.
It's interesting because I'm working on a writing project right now, for a museum catalog, and I've read, and it's a tiny text, maybe it's 800 words, but I've read so many kind of books or articles or whatever in preparing for that text that the reader may never kind of encounter, but that those histories or those thoughts or that way of seeing the work is embedded in that text. And so it's interesting to hear you guys talk about the kind of separation between what the audience will see and what not will see, and what the audience would see and what they won't see, and how even the things that they won't see still really kind of informs the work that you're producing in the studio. I had one more question about the ways in which you guys are kind of thinking about identity, because I think that's something that's really kind of rooted in both of your practices and the works that you showed, particularly, Michi, around the way that you're using kind of oil as a representation of the black male form. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think somewhere in my head there's when we talk about oil, we're talking about wealth, but then we're talking also about things that are stolen, or a material that is stolen. But then also, I think somewhere in there is a racist joke of being oil spots, and then there's also a way of me connecting that to something that we walk past every day, but then there's also the effort to take that sort of that natural element that we still see play out. So I was very interested in what the oil spot meant sort of to me, but it also being something that we just walk past every day, something we're not thinking about. But also, at the time of expiration for that person, it just began to annoy the fuck out of me that how people can't see that this is a person, that this is a person. And then having been pulled over by cops, my brother is in the back. My first night here, we were pulled over by cops and had 9 pistols at our heads, right? So every time one of these events happen, I know what it's like to be on that side of a service revolver. And about 2 years ago, I had that experience again, to have that pointed at my face. But then to survive that encounter, but then to think about all of these things, or all of these events that happen, and where those things lay, and where possibly I could have lain, you know what I mean? Like, it becomes, like the idea of the oil spot, it is there because we're such a society where we go to war to get this thing, we steal this thing, so that we can drive around and do all of these, you know, our everyday lives. But it's so meaningless, I mean, in such a way that I begin to think about like these deaths just as meaningless as these thefts, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's still the oil slick metaphor, because it still marks the ground, right? So like you still have a recording of, you know, that death, but you know it's become so everyday that you're, you know, desensitized, or that you are I guess, yeah, desensitized might be the phrase.
Yeah. So I begin to identify with
Yeah.
these sort of I'm using very careful language the way I talk about this
Yeah.
too. So like I'm and that's very purposeful, because I don't want to dwell on black trauma, because I believe that black people are heroes. I believe that every time you see a black person, you see someone who's the strongest people walking the earth. Like, I don't have any problems expressing that. So I'm very careful about how I talk about these figures that have lain. And I'm not saying that to be desensitized or whatever, but I'm saying that because we have a Rolodex of these images. And honestly, I'm tired in such a way. So I'm tired of identifying with what it means to lay and then to lose. When these people have survived so much. And I'd rather focus on the winning than the losing. But then there are times that you do identify with that situations, and seeing those service revolvers like in your face, that never goes away. So every time one of those happens, it's sort of this, I can see myself triggering. That's kind of how I deal with it. It's like I know who I am, and then how I exist, and how I'm going to stay. But it's not my problem. In a way, you know what I mean? Like, why am I concerned about making you feel comfortable? Which is like kind of what you read at the beginning. So I'm trying to live my full big Michi. You know what I mean? Like, without compromise of any of it.
Yeah, I think, piggybacking a bit on what Michi said, the reading that you had at the beginning, I thought was very, really resonated for me, because I really feel like there's a universality in this specific. And I think we've been really approaching this whole notion of oneness, right? The sense of that we are all part of this collective humanity in a way. I think we've been approaching it in a really kind of childish way. And what I mean by that is that people want a, generally speaking, and the person might be very well intentioned, but they want a oneness based on sameness. And the reality is the human family is diverse, and so many different cultures, so many different languages that are spoken. I think the harder thing to do is to really embrace the notion of diversity. So a unity that's based on diversity, where I can be African American, where I can love being black, I can love my culture, the way we dance, the way we move, the way we dress, and how you can also find your humanity in that experience. Someone can come from another part of the world. I may not understand their language, I may not understand their dress or the food that they eat, but I can also recognize my humanity in that experience. So I think for me, some people, sometimes, I've heard comments where people have, one I heard not too long ago actually, from a person of African descent actually made a comment like, oh, your work is really black, which I thought was a very peculiar comment. And then of course, my next question is, well, do you say the same thing when you see work that is really white? And why does that have to be a prerequisite for seeing the humanity in the work? So for me, identity is I'm very clear about my blackness. I feel steeped in it. I feel very at peace with that. And I view that as one expression of the diversity of the human family. And it's legitimate, and it's as Bill D. Jones said, he said, I don't have to apologize, I just am. And it's up for you to see. So that's how it plays out for me.
I'm going to open it up for a few questions. Any questions? I'll do it.
How you doing? I'm Eric the Radical. My question is for you, maybe for both, because a lot of, like both of y'all deal with, not desensitizing, but just that inner silence of maybe pent up a little anger, maybe when you just hear like another this and another that. Looking at that sardine piece, it was crazy. It was cool. Thinking about how back then slave ships who had Africans that spoke the same language from the same tribe, how they would get together and revolt and was it mutiny, cause a mutiny and take over the ship. What are some examples or some ways to do that now here with the prison system? Because if we look back then, it's like, yeah, like we salute them, we would make a movie about them, we would praise them for rising up then and taking over the slave ship. And if it was a vote, I would vote for prisons to rise up and take over the prisons just like they did with the slave ships. What are some ways to do that, or how are they doing that in today's society, taking over the prisons?
Well, I'm very clear about my lane. I'm an artist, so I'm not a public policy person. I would say use whatever it is that you have. So if you're an artist, use your art to talk about the situation in some way, if it's important to you, right? If you're a public policy person, try to bring about some policies that will help to deal with that situation. If you're a business person, come up with a business that will have some effect on that system of oppression. So I think the important thing is that not necessarily specifically what you do as much as it is do something. And all of us have the capacity to do something. And I think it's finding what we're aligned to do, whatever that thing is, or things, and then using that apparatus as a mechanism for change. And I think we all have that responsibility as being members of the human family, no matter where we see injustice, Because it's not just, as black folks warehoused in the prison system, but, You know, we have women who are dealing with oppression on a daily basis. Men need to raise their voices for women. You know, we have people suffering all across the world. And so wherever we see that, you know, we have to, I think it's very important for us, we have a responsibility to find a way to take a stand and to address that issue as much as we possibly can. So there are 1,000,001 different ways to affect change. Pick one and do it.
For me, it's very simple. It's stay alive and stay out of prison. If you know it's a trap, then why would you do something to trap yourself? That's that simple. I don't have to play like a politics game or anything like that. If you know that the man has set a trap, like the prayer, then why go for it? Why lead a life that goes towards that? Like your job is to stay who you are, the best who you are, and stay out of that man's prison, out of his trap. Like there's a whole history of his trap, of this system. So why would you lead the life to get you to that? It's just that simple. Just don't do it. Be the best black man that you can be. Be the best human that you could be. There's no bullshit around it. It's if you know that that's there, then don't fuck with it. Like, don't do it. Go to school. And even like for the man who does go to prison, like when he comes out, give him an opportunity. Like I got students that have gone through the system. One kid, I bought all of his weed, all of it. I was like, how much you got? If I'm a real dude, I just go to the bank, I buy all the weed. Am I gonna smoke all that weed? I gave it all away. But it's me saying to him, you don't need to do this. Then a year later, he called me back. He's like, can you get me a job? That's all. It's simple.
Hey everyone, my name is Curtis Bryant. My question, or what I want to say is, I'm glad that we're talking about process. I think it's really important for artists to share their process, and I thank you for sharing that with us. Something else that really stood out to me, and that I'm happy that we're having this conversation about, is spirituality, right? I think that you both honor that in your work with a lot of respect. But I will say that I feel like spirituality has shown up in a lot of recent work for artists, especially what you brought up social media. And so I just wanted to know if you felt like this conversation or this aspect to the work is a part of the like woke trend, or is it, or in a serious sense, or is it the world is really in a really fucked up place, and our people are artists being called to, tap into other places because we don't want to deal with the world. So if you can speak to it, you feel like it's a trend, or because you two honor it. So how does it, outside of being an artist, you're also human and you have feelings. So when you're looking at other artists, are you like, you weren't doing this before? Yeah.
I mean, I think I naturally respond to artists that I feel some kind of spiritual resonance in the work, irregardless of where they come from, what cultural origin, and what gender they are, I don't care. I think the sense that I get is that there's a lot of exasperation in the world right now, in particular in the West. I think people are realizing that the government structures that we have historically turned to for answers don't have the answers. They don't know how to solve the problems. So I think there is a quest for answers. What is the solution? And for me, my path, I'm a Baha'i, so I have a very specific worldview as a Baha'i. But my encouragement to anybody is to, do some kind of spiritual internal work. Because, there's so much heartache in the world right now, but there also are some pockets of hope. And that is generated, right, by a soul, by a person who, there's an internal desire to want to heal what's broken in the world. And for me, that's soul work. That comes from the spirit. So, and we all have one. So I just think it's really important to try and operate from that ground zero point. And then whatever comes out of you as a result of that will do no harm. You know? So that's the best that I can say.
I don't know. I really don't. But, like, so I grew up in a church, Southern church, drums, everything. The preacher's preaching, and the preacher says, God created you in his image. So me, as a very young person, I said, then what does that make me? And that's about how I live my life. Like, if this is what you believe, and this is what you're telling me, and that this spiritual thing created me in his image, then I am to act like God. It's simple.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I am an author and poet. And thinking about your responses to the first question, I'm curious to hear your responses about how we actually cross those lanes and begin to have a dialogue as artists, as business owners, as policymakers. How do we create a dialogue about the things that are happening in our community, even though we are in different areas?
I think that is happening right now. Like, I think what's happening is that we're seeing a nation react to a thing, and there's people who have to make a decision. Like, we are all put in a position to make a decision, like what you're saying.
There's this thing that is looming over us, and I don't care how you voted for it. You have to admit, you have to be very honest, that this thing is not right. And so people, Americans, everyone, are looking at where is the real truth in all of this. And especially for me right now, I'm very fascinated by the language of America. God bless America, and this land is your land, this land is my land. All of the American sort of mythologies are failing. They're breaking down in our face. The Christianity thing, it's falling apart. The moral thing, it's falling apart. America's own mythologies right now are falling apart. So people are searching for something more spiritual. They're searching for a different type of truth, because we're God bless
America. And then there's this thing looming, right? If we believe in that story.
But also at the same time, while this thing is looming, we're seeing this thing try to reverse what was just very intelligent, what was probably the smartest that we will see in our generation, right? Here is now this thing that's trying to reverse history in a way. So you as a policymaker, you as an artist, you as the business owner, now it's time for you to look for truth within what it is that you do and be very truthful about it. Like, if your intentions are to change policy, then go and do that. It's like those kids out there marching today. That's their intentions, right? If your intentions are to be more spiritual, then go be that. Like, right now is the time for us as Americans to live a very real truth, especially for Black Americans. It's even more of a truth than the truth we've already been living, right? And so that's why I like how the millennial approaches social media. Like the idea that there's another side of Twitter, in a lot of ways, becomes an underground railroad of communication for black people. When you see the memes, the super black memes, the millennial, like the way that a photo and small amount of black language can influence a whole nation is very powerful. So there's a very real truth that's happening right now. And I think that a lot of people are aware of the thing that is looming, that is reversing what America thought it could be. And so, in all honesty, I saw a post where one of my friends was like, this is white people's business, and black people need to stay out of it. They need to fix their own shit, kind of in a way. But I also see that the millennial, like through small language, that you guys will change culture the quickest. It's just my belief. Like what makes someone put up beans, greens, potato, tomato? Exactly. It's that simple.
You know, I'm really distrustful of comfortable spaces. So I think one of the things we have to be conscious about is putting ourselves in spaces when we're not comfortable. I just did a residency in Corsicana, Texas, which is 58 miles southeast of Dallas. Corsicana is a very small town. There's a rail line that runs to the center of town. You have on the west side a white side, and on the east side is a black side. On the white side, Victorian houses, houses from the Civil War, pre-Civil War era, which have been restored, mostly from city dwellers from Dallas who have moved in with money to refurbish them. On the black side, which is impoverished, demonstrably impoverished, these people are the descendants of the enslaved African Americans who worked the cotton fields of Texas. These two communities don't know each other. And we had a situation which sparked up over some gorilla in a cage. I'm not going to get into that, but I had mentioned this to somebody who was connected in the city. They took the gorilla out of the cage. I mentioned it because of all the problematics historically with that, with the association of animals with the black body and what that has done to how we think about the black body. So anyway, the gorilla was removed. Make a long story short, I started getting hate messages via Facebook Messenger because of a conversation I had over a dinner party about the problematics of that image, right? It's fine. I'm built for that. They can do whatever they want to do. It's not going to affect me. I'm at peace. But what I was saying to people who were sending me hate messages, you need to get to know your neighbors. Because I don't have any skin in this game, really. I'm a transient. I'm here for a month, and then I'm gone. But there are a lot of people on the east side of town who have a problem with this image. And if you knew your neighbors, then you would know that. So I'm saying that to frame this whole idea of putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. We're around people who aren't like us. And how uncomfortable that is sometimes, how difficult that is. But that's the necessary work to building community. And if we can live with the discomfort, with the unease of that, then the gift is that we extend our sense of brotherhood and sisterhood. That's the prize. But it's like being in the studio. I have to go to the studio at least 5 or 6 times a week in order to get the results that I want to out of the studio. If I don't endure the discomfort, I don't have anything to show. So I think it's very important for us to put ourselves in those spaces where we're surrounded by people who aren't necessarily like us. Maybe they're from a different profession, maybe they're from a different culture, maybe they speak a different language. But if we're serious about this business of building community, then we have to be willing to make that sacrifice.
Perfect. It's a good comment to end on. I wanted to thank Artadia, the artist, and Atlanta Contemporary for allowing us to have this dialogue. And just kind of, the last 2 days, I've been here and meeting with artists in their studios and having really wonderful conversations about art. And I think that that's what occurred here today, and that's what, you know, when we think about art spaces like the one we're in, you know, right now, art should be at the center of those conversations, and I appreciate you guys, an engagement, a dialogue about art and the possibilities of art, and thank you guys for participating and listening. Thank you.